On Greater Podcast today, we're speaking to Michael Sas-Rolfes, who is a conservation economist. How are you, Michael?
Great, thanks. And you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. So to start us off, as a conservation economist, what drew you to this field of study and research?
Well, I've been passionate about wildlife since high school, and I had two passions: music and wildlife. But I was told that neither of them were acceptable career choices. So I ended up studying business, doing a business degree, but I was still volunteering in the environmental sector. And then I realized I could actually combine what I was learning with my passion.
And you mentioned the fact that it wasn't seen as a suitable passion and a suitable job to do, to go into acting and music and conservation, all that sort of stuff. Do you regret studying business, or was it actually, did it do you well now in what you do?
I don't regret studying business. I do regret not pursuing my musical interest first.
Yep.
I think I could have done a lot more, and it would have been very fulfilling. But I was pushed away from it. So if there's one piece of advice I can give to people, is stick with your passion. If you know you have a passion, let's say already in your late teens,
Yep.
that's unlikely to change. I mean, I was told at the time I hadn't developed adult interest patterns. But here I am. I'm in my 50s, and my two passions still are wildlife and music. So either I haven't grown up yet, or I already knew what I liked back then.
And when looking back to that, do you see that still as a truth, or do you think what people have been telling you about how conservation economy isn't a good thing, do you now look back and think that that's actually ridiculous?
Well, they didn't say a conservation economy wasn't a good thing. They said conservation was a dead end career choice, and at the time it was. I mean, if you looked at the careers that were available, conservation was very much in the realm of non-profit activity. It was seen as a charitable thing to do. People weren't well paid. But as I went into studying, that was around about the time that there was this growing consciousness about how important the environment is and how important environmental issues are. This was the late 90s, and Gro Harlem Brundtland, the ex-prime minister of Norway, developed this report, Our Common Future, which then led to the World Commission on Environment and Development, and that in turn led to the Rio Convention and the Climate Change Convention. And so there was this, all of a sudden, there was this flourishing of understanding about how important all these issues were. And I was lucky because I was in the right place at the right time, and I caught the cusp of that wave, as it were.
You mentioned climate change, which is obviously quite a hot topic in our society we're in. How afraid should we be of the climate change that we're dealing with at the moment?
Well, I don't think we should be afraid of anything. I think what I think we should do is we should be proactive. We should recognize all these environmental issues coming towards us as real threats to humanity, and we should just be proactive in addressing them.
And are they bad? I mean, are we overreacting, or are they worse than what we think?
I think that's all a matter of perception, right?
Yeah.
Some people really hype them up, and and you see these predictions. Oh, we're all going to be dead in 10 years, or a lot of these predictions turn out not to be true. I mean, there's my favorite chap when I was actually, again, in my late teens, I went to a talk at the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and there was this chap called Paul Ehrlich who came out from Stanford. And he gave us this incredibly depressing presentation. And, according to that presentation, now we're all dead. Yeah. Right. And he was wrong. He was wrong about so many things. But he was wrong in terms of the timeframes that he laid out. He wasn't necessarily wrong about the severity of some of the threats facing us, but it's just that they might be much longer term, and we might develop technologies and ways to address them. Yep. So we're kind of in a race against time. And I think that's the thing, is don't get scared, don't get freaked out. Just realize that we are facing challenges, and it gives us a cause. It gives us something to work towards to address these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does the future actually look like? I mean, where do you see the world going in the next 100, 200, 300,000 years? I mean, do you have an answer for that, or is it it's a very loaded question, obviously?
I do not. I think you have to pick your future. And I think you need to be what a colleague of mine calls a pragmatic optimist. You need to have a positive attitude towards the future and just lean in and work towards that.
And then when things come, obviously just try to solve them and go through the steps, and then as they come, because we can't predict anything. Am I right in saying that?
No, I mean, I think make sort of vague predictions about the likely direction of things. Certainly. And I mean, human nature, if you study human nature carefully, humans are somewhat predictable
Yeah.
in certain ways, collectively, not individually. And we can, we can tell that if we incentivize humans in certain ways, they're likely to act in certain ways. So as a conservation economist, a lot of what I work with is incentives, and the incentives that humans face to do certain things.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, if we want to change our behavior, we need to look at the incentives that are leading to behaviors that might not serve us well, and we need to work with trying to change those incentives.
Yeah, absolutely. So economic growth and environmental conservation are sometimes seen as conflicting goals. How can we reconcile these two objectives to achieve sustainable development?
Okay, well, I'm gonna stick my neck out now and say something really controversial, and that is that I think economic growth as a policy objective makes no sense at all,
Okay.
and we shouldn't be pursuing it. Economies grow naturally and organically. Humans and all other species have a natural desire to flourish. They have a natural desire to flourish, and humans have learned through experience that it's very helpful to trade. We've benefited enormously as a species by trading, exchanging ideas, exchanging goods and services. And so that's something we just quite naturally do. And we should be left to our own devices to do that, because collectively we can work out the best solutions. If we work collectively and sort of also manage each other's selfish instincts somewhat, right? Then we will work together towards the best solutions. For governments to come along and tinker too much generally causes more problems than it's worth. And that includes trying to promote growth. Because typically, if you artificially stimulate growth, you're drawing from somewhere else, right? You're taking from somewhere else to grow. Growth is just it's quite a normal flourishing. It's just quite a normal thing to happen if you leave people to their own devices. So I would say that really the problems that we face today are that we tinker too much. We suppress the wrong things. We encourage the wrong things. There's too much tinkering going on, and often governments are very much at fault. Governments spend a lot of time trying to they don't really understand human incentives properly, and so they pass laws and regulations which aren't really popular, that create perverse incentives, and then people try and get around those, and they just cause a lot more problems than they solve.
You mentioned that individuals, so I'm interrupting you. You mentioned that individuals in the past used to barter and do all these basic things, which you're still doing today. Where do you see the future of humans going later in life? And is it a negative or positive way? Are we progressing in a good way, or are we progressing in a negative way that's almost unhealthy for us?
Well, again, I think you could look at it as the glass half full or the glass half empty. There's this constant tension, right, between and it's interesting because humans have this desire to collectively trade and sort of form collective organizations to do things for the collective good. But then some humans also try and exploit those situations, right? You have this tendency for some people to empire build and sort of draw on other humans' desires to do things. And then the human ego is also a very dangerous thing, right? So some people's egos get completely carried away, and then they get something of a god complex, and they think they can save the world, or they can do what's best for humanity. And that's where a lot of the problems arise, right? Is when you've got leaders who are not really true leaders, in my opinion, and that they stop listening to the people and they start pursuing their own agendas, and then take us in a direction that is not necessarily healthy on a societal level.
You're mentioning leaders. What is the correct leadership style that should be put in place for countries to achieve a certain success in our society, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, the world is not nearly democratic enough. And by democratic, I mean more sort of participatory,
Yeah,
democratic in a participatory way, more inclusively democratic. Democracy is true democracy is a system that allows discourse, that allows discussion, that allows things to evolve and adapt. It's not voting for one person every 4 years to do whatever the hell they want for the next 4 years. That's not, to
absolutely.
me,
Yeah,
that's not democracy, right? That form of representative democracy, which people believe is democracy, I believe has actually gone horribly wrong, and it's served us very badly. And so what we have is we have a crisis of leadership globally, where the leaders often aren't true leaders. To me, true leaders should be humble. There's not nearly enough humility amongst leadership. They should be humble, and they should be empathetic, and they should be compassionate, and they should really be in touch with people,
yeah,
as a whole, and listen to the people. And we should be constructing institutions that draw on the collective wisdom of people, and where different people can have a say. And the market is very good at that, right? But of course, the market favors people with more resources. So not
absolutely.
a lot of people don't like the market for that reason. But if we're going to have democratic institutions that are responsive to a larger number of people in real time, to me, that is effective. And effective leaders are people who enable those kind of systems, not who take over and it's like, okay, it's my way or the highway. To me, that's
100%.
not good leadership at all.
So we're discussing leadership and as a whole what works in society and leading people. I mean, I've read a lot of the news and everything, and I personally think it's a brainwashing thing. What is your opinion on the news and taking control of a large group of people? Do you think that's true?
Yes, well, it's very interesting. And I've had some direct experience of this in recent years. The extent to which the mainstream media is now controlled is quite frightening.
Yeah,
And the extent to which mainstream media is also an echo chamber. So certain views become popular for whatever reason, and maybe simply because they suit the agenda of certain powerful interest groups. And those powerful interest groups are incredibly influential, and they just
100%. Yeah.
prevent dissenting views from being published and heard. So I think that's a very real problem in modern society, to an extent that people don't realize. What's also happened is, over the last 50 to 100 years, we've learned a lot more about human psychology and how to manipulate
Yeah.
human psychology, right? And a lot of the folks in the media world know that. So they know how to spin a good story. They know how to get people fired up. They know how to sort of manipulate their emotions. And I think and people don't realize the extent to which they are being manipulated.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very serious problem.
And how should humans, the regular citizen of a country, go about trying to solve this issue? I mean, it's not an overnight sort of thing. How can someone who's just a regular guy go about trying to fix it?
Well, I don't think you can obviously fix it that
Yeah.
easily, but I think what we should all be doing, what we owe it to ourselves, is to always be skeptical, always question everything, and do your own research, and always look for dissenting views and listen to those dissenting views with an open mind, and think logically about when you hear there's a sort of a standard view, oh, XYZ is true. If it doesn't totally feel right with you, start listening to people who have different opinions,
Yeah.
and think it through. Just think it logically. We should not rely on media without questioning it. We should always be questioning. That's the most responsible thing I think you can do.
Yeah,
Not to the
100%.
point of belligerence, but
Yeah.
I think a healthy dose of skepticism is really important.
And
And never lose your curiosity. Always be curious to know more.
And back to the whole controlling scheme of the news and how the media is almost brainwashing people. Is it getting worse? And are people being able to control it or realizing it as society goes on? Do you think it's going to be an issue that's going to constantly get worse and more in control as the years go by?
Well, again, it's so hard, when you ask people about worse and better. These things are perceptions.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've had times in history when we know, for example, during the Nazi era in Nazi Germany, there was brainwashing on a large scale. I'm not even sure that sort of scale or extent of brainwashing would be completely possible in today's age. It might not be. So I don't know if it's getting worse or not, but
Yeah.
it's certainly not getting better or any safer.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I think the risk of media manipulation is massive.
Yeah.
So I think we always have to have our radar on, and it's not going to go away. It's never going to change, right?
Yeah.
Human nature being what it's being, there's always going to be some people who try to bamboozle you or way lead
Yeah.
the masses. That's always going to be there. So
Yeah,
I think
100%.
one has to be aware of that.
So I'm going to go more back into your research. During your research, have you come across any surprising or counterintuitive findings related to economic aspects or environmental issues?
Oh, all the time. That's the fun thing about economics, is very often the obvious answer is not the correct answer.
Yeah.
I look at life like a big chess game where you need to think several moves ahead. With every in a chess game, there's an obvious move that yields short-term benefits, but very often it's the wrong move in the long run, right?
Yeah.
Because then a few moves ahead, there's a counter move, and so it is with many complex issues. And most of the issues we face in modern society and environmental issues are inevitably complex issues. They operate in complex, adaptive, social, ecological systems. That's a big word, right? But it's that involve human behavior and humans interacting with, and then environmental feedback effects and human feedback effects. And you've always got to think several steps ahead. If you do this, well, then that's going to happen, and then that's going to counterbalance this, and then you've got to think, well, how do you counterbalance that? And so, and very often the results are surprising because the backlash is bigger than you expected, right? So and then you've got to come with the policies that you craft have to be a lot smarter. They have to be a lot more adaptive. They have to be, So really, that is the nature of my work to a large extent, is surprises and counterintuitive effects.
And how do you stay up to date with all these changes and developments within your industry? I mean, I can imagine that must be quite difficult.
It is. I mean, you and I think this is true for anything today. The world is changing so fast. Technology is changing so fast. There are all these things being thrown at us. You've got to stay on top of it. And the way you stay on top of it is you stay connected to media. You stay connected not just to mainstream media, and you have your media feeds that feed you information on your topic, but you also stay connected to social media. Get into the Twitterverse, for example, if you're serious about, and then you find the other people who are working in your domain. You listen to what they have to say. So you get into the conversation, and you monitor the conversation, and you try and stay on top of things like that. And then you challenge people, and you got to keep the conversation going. You cannot afford to assume these days that, oh, I went and did a degree, I finished my degree, now I'm a qualified XYZ, and that's it. I'm set for life. No ways. You're going to spend the rest of your life learning and trying to stay on top of your game.
Yeah. So generally throughout the podcast, I mean, as you probably realized during our communication beforehand, success and defining success is a big thing. So I'm going to change the topic more towards your personal definition of success. What does that look like? What is your personal definition of success?
Sure, it's a tricky one. You want to feel fulfilled in what you're doing, so you want to feel like you're doing something useful. So it really comes down to feeling like you're making a difference in this world, right? And I think most people want a feeling of autonomy, like they've got some control over their lives, and agency, like they're doing something useful to society. They're playing a role. They're doing something valued and useful. So I think it's identifying social needs and then fulfilling them in some way. Now, for some people, that might just be inventing a clever product which you sell to the marketplace. The fact that people are buying it and willing to pay money for it, that's a measure of success. But for people who are trying to engage in more sort of complex social, ecological issues like I am, there's no obvious indicator like that.
Yes.
It's just, am I influencing policy? Am I getting people to think? Am I changing people's opinions in a way that is probably eventually going to lead to what I consider to be a better result. Do people agree with me on that? Do they think, yes, no, you're doing something good, you're doing something useful for society? I think that's really important. No person is an island, right? We're all connected. We have to be part of society. We have to be part of our community. So are we pulling together with our community? Are we pulling in a positive direction? I think that is critical.
And do you think you've achieved that success? I mean, you've obviously achieved a lot of it, but are you done yet? And what's the next step in your journey to try not?
Absolutely, you're never done, and you're going to still die trying. I mean, I have, and I think all my life I've sort of had ambitions, but it's always a shifting goalpost. You sort of get to a point and you realize, well, this is fine, but actually there's that, and I want to go there, and it's dynamic, and so I think it should be. I don't think, but maybe some people differ. Maybe some people say, well, I want to hit 65, retire, quit, and play golf, and that's my life goal. Well, that's not my life goal. It never will be. I don't ever want to retire and start playing golf. I want to keep on trying to make a difference in this world. And maybe as I get older and my energy levels drop, it'll be a little less globally ambitious and more locally focused, and within my capabilities. But I think I will always be striving to make a difference
100%.
in a positive way. Yeah.
So what is the next step in your journey to continue doing that?
Well, I've just completed what I call my midlife crisis PhD. I submitted my thesis a few weeks ago. I'm still waiting for it to be evaluated. But moving into the next phase of my life, I'm looking at furthering the research, drawing from the insights that I gained doing that PhD research. I'll do more engagement with other students, supervising other students, helping them, a little bit of teaching, so forth. So I will remain somewhat involved in academia, but what I really want to do now is something more practical again, something where I can really make a difference in this world. And so I'm looking at a few prospective projects, and hoping something will come of that.
Amazing. So as teenagers, what are some practical ways we can contribute to sustainable development? I mean, are there any ways me as a teenager can help?
Yeah, so there are two things you can do. Firstly, it starts very much at home, right?
Yeah.
So lead by example. Learn what little things you can do in your day-to-day life, good habits you can get into, like recycling or being more conscious about what you consume. And those little things matter, how you live. And then embody that as a person when you go out there. Provide a good example to others. So educate yourself, but it's mostly around educating yourself. And as I said before, don't just download whatever's thrown at you. Also question. So if you engage with the world in that sort of questioning way, and always think that there might be another, okay, this might seem like the obviously good thing to do for the environment. Let's say getting an electric car as an example. But then it might turn out that, wait a minute, where I live in South Africa, actually the resources required to power an electric car, there's all sorts of hidden costs. And actually, it's not the best way to go right now, right? So inform yourself. It might make sense to buy an electric car if you live in downtown New York. Might not make sense to get an electric car if you live in a smaller town in South Africa. So there are these sort of things. Educate yourself. Just be curious, learn, talk to your peers, and I think, again, engage socially and work together collectively in a way to be conscious. And it all starts at a local level. I think way too many people worry about, especially when you're young, because you sort of think big. It's like, how can I save the planet? It starts at home. It starts at home, and it starts by building up knowledge, and eventually, over time, as you get older and you leverage yourself into a greater position of power and influence, then you can make a greater scale impact. But don't be overambitious now, and also don't sweat the large stuff.
Yeah.
People, going back to your earlier questions, like sort of concern about, are we all gonna succumb to global warming in 10 years time or something like that. Don't worry about that kind of stuff. The big stuff will happen no matter what. Focus on the small stuff and then build up that way, is what I would say.
And then when you look back to when you were 16, I mean, how are you making an impact? And when you compare yourself now and when you're 16, what does it look like?
Wow, yeah. I'll come back to what I said earlier. I just wish I'd followed my passion a little bit, with a little bit more conviction. I think I was on the right track. I think my passions, there was nothing wrong with my passions, just perhaps more self-doubt than there should have been.
Yeah.
So I'd say be confident. Don't be overconfident. Don't be arrogant or obnoxious, but be confident that your passions come from a good place, and always just push forward with an inquiring mind. Reach out to people, ask them, look for mentors. Don't be shy to approach mentors. I mean, I think that's one thing I did get right, is when I was younger, I was quite sort of bold in approaching people and asking them to advise and help me. And it was intimidating sometimes, but I got very good responses ultimately. With people, older people who are mentor type people, they love an enthusiastic young person who's really wants to forge ahead. So do that. And if anything, I could have done more of that and followed my passions with a bit more conviction. And again, if you've got parents who are cautious, right, and worried about safe career choices and those sort of things, I would say, and the parents will hate me for saying this, I would say maybe ignore them. More. I think our parents tend to project a lot of their own fears and doubts onto us, and we would do well to ignore those.
Yeah. You mentioned mentors, which obviously have, in my opinion, is a very important thing in the development of a human being. Who are your mentors? Who are your mentors?
Oh, I've had multiple mentors at various stages of my life, just for very specific things. So I don't think one should pick one mentor, like this is my mentor, I'm going to become exactly like this person. No. So let me give you an example. In high school, I did a project on the genus Acacia. So I approached a person who'd just written a book on acacias. He was pretty much the authority on acacias in South Africa at the time. And at first and he didn't seem very enthusiastic. So at first I was quite sort of shy, and fortunately he reached out to me again. And then he sort of took me under his wing and he taught me a lot of what he knew. And that was amazing. So I learned all about acacias from the expert on acacias. And then there were other mentors at university who taught me specific topics and subjects and so forth. So you pick your mentors for very specific things that you want to learn at specific stages of your development, and mix and match, and that's what I would suggest.
So you mentioned you had lots of mentors throughout different stages of your life. What is one very important lesson that you've learned from one of your mentors?
Wow.
That's almost stuck with you.
Gosh, I can't think offhand of any one. I suppose the one mentor to whom I'm extremely grateful was he was an ecologist, and I came to him as a commerce student.
Yeah.
He said to me, sign up to an ecology master's. And I said, but I couldn't possibly do that. I mean, I'm an economics student. And he was like, no, nonsense. Absolutely not. You're actually perfect, because you come in with a different perspective, and the sort of blending of perspectives is fantastic. And I learned that from one or two other people as well, also in the ecology domain. They said the most interesting stuff always happens at the interface. It happens at the interface of two very different things. And that's where the interesting and exciting stuff happens. And so again, combining ecology and combining environmental issues with economics, that ecological economic interface to me is and it remains incredibly exciting and stimulating, and that cross-fertilization, I think that's where a lot of the interesting stuff happens, and that's where a lot of the opportunity lies. So I would say seek out those sort of things. Look for unusual combinations. Be the chef in the kitchen who experiments with mixing unusual ingredients, and be creative.
And then to end us off, I always ask this final question because I think it's a very important one. If you could go back and say one thing to your 16-year-old self, what would it be?
Just be more confident.
Be more
Yeah,
confident.
believe in yourself. Follow your passion and follow it with absolute conviction.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate this. Thank you.